Let's be honest, Spartans. Interviews suck. Dozens and even hundreds of hours invested into this one company opening, and then ghosted. As I discussed in my other video, why you can't land a job, and here is why it may not be your fault, the odds are stacked against you. But that doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. With effort and the right guidance, you can beat this game with success and land the job that you have always wanted. I have been on both sides of the interviewing process, and I've interviewed hundreds of candidates for several fields of cybersecurity. Whether you are currently applying for a cybersecurity job or even considering it, mastering the interviewing process is a must. I have discussed this topic briefly in my video named Breaking into Cybersecurity, Part 4, Applying for a Job. But this is my attempt at condensing everything into a mini-series on this topic. This first video will cover the phases of the interviewing process and types of questions. As for the next videos, you will have to wait and see. Let's begin. The slimmed-down interviewing process usually has three phases: human resources, technical, and leadership. This model is quite old, and you will see more often than not companies implementing an extended version of it. For example, companies may send you a technical challenge for you to solve offline or online and explain how you did it. Live coding interviews are quite common with FANG companies. FANGs are also notorious for having long on-site interview processes where they bring you in for several technical interviews, for instance 5 interviews. Additionally, some companies that are hiring for new positions for which they don't really have the capabilities to interview may ask people from other offices or teams to interview you for a position that is not entirely related to theirs. As an example, if a company does not have security operation capabilities, they may ask someone from the cloud security team to interview you. In this situation, the person interviewing you will be looking for someone that has at least the same level of knowledge as them, and preferably more. Before leadership calls, some companies may have behavioral or culture fit interviews where you will be asked questions to test if you are a good fit for the team and the company. This dedicated interview may actually be spread across multiple non-dedicated interviews. And in this case, you will be punctually asked by people from human resources, technical teams, or even leadership to answer these same questions. As an example, during a technical interview, you may be asked, how would you address a vulnerability that the engineers cannot fix because it would break the vulnerable service? This will force you to balance the urgency of security with the urgency of other team members and the business. Finally, the leadership call can be something as simple as a call with your future manager, but you may also have a call with your leads, the VP of security, or even a C-suite, for instance, a CISO. Let's focus on the slimmed-down model and go over the 3 major phases of the interviewing process. During the first few minutes of the human resources interview, you will be asked to explain your CV and your background, and the interviewer will tell you about the role you applied for and the company. These first few minutes are a sort of mutual sales pitch, where the interviewer sells the company as a great place to work, and you sell yourself as a great candidate for the position. One of the future videos for this mini-series is going to be about tips and tricks. But I will start now with a tip. Prepare your elevator pitch, because you have to sell yourself for this position. One mistake that I used to make was to simply regurgitate the CV without even tailoring my pitch to the position that I was applying for. You should always highlight the hard and soft skills that are relevant to this position that you are applying for. For example, if you are applying for a cloud security position, you can frame your current malware researcher position from a perspective of automation. You can talk about how you are using the cloud, or how would you like to use the cloud to scale your tooling and automation. It is during this phase that you are going to get questions such as, why have you applied for this role? Why do you want to work for us? Why do you want to leave your current position and company? What is your current salary, or what are your salary expectations? And finally, how does your experience fit the role? If getting to this phase is actually the hardest, getting to the next phase, it's quite easy. If you know how to sell yourself, have a good set of questions prepared, and are easy to get along with, you will easily jump to the next phase, the technical phase. For beginners, this interview is usually the one they prepare the most for, and for a good reason. Earlier in your career, most of what dictates your success is your technical prowess, and you can usually get away with less than ideal, but not terrible, soft skills. This process usually involves people from your team and even others depending on the company. At a high level, you are going to encounter 2 types of questions: simple and open-ended. A simple question would be something like, what is the port for HTTPS? And the answer is 443. An open-ended question, on the other hand, would be something like, how would you build a botnet? Simple questions tend to be quite rare these days during interviews, and they are good for people that like to memorize. But with these questions, there is no leeway for mistake. It's either right or it is wrong, and there is no in between. Open-ended questions, on the other hand, allow you to go as broad or deep as you choose, with the help of your interviewer, of course. An important point with any question, but especially with open-ended questions, is that you should speak out loud while you are thinking. You should explain your thought process to the interviewer. This is important because if your interviewer understands your thought process, they can guide you. This is quite important because you may follow a thought process or route that does not fit the expectations of the interviewer, and you may end up losing precious time. You may also risk getting into topics that you don't understand and hanging yourself. Your entire interview may be mostly about high-level security concepts, but you may be asked to be more specific in terms of implementation. And this is where practical experience, either at work or home, is important. The last thing you want is to sell yourself as a power user of AWS, but dare not be able to explain how to set up guard duty or mention some out-of-the-box guard duty detection that actually doesn't exist. The final round of interview or interviews are with leadership. This interview is similar to the first one, human resources, but much more critical, because it is important that your future manager or lead is impressed by you. After all, you are going to spend the next couple of years working with them. Here the questions tend to be of the behavior type, but you may also be asked about tech, though not with the same level of detail as a proper technical interview, unless your manager is heavily technical. Your manager will want to see if you are a good fit for the team, how you can make the team better, and your goals. They can also ask you questions such as, what is your plan for the first 6 months after joining this team? Expect a lot of open-ended questions here and bring your social A game, as the better you articulate your answers, the more likely you are to be hired. Now let's talk about types of questions and table flipping. I have briefly overviewed the types of questions you can expect, but now I'm going to summarize everything again. At a high level, you can expect 2 types of questions: simple one-answer questions and open-ended questions, where your answers are usually explored by your interviewer and turned into more questions. Both of these usually fall under one of 4 categories. The first category is behavior-based, and with this type of questions, your interviewer wants to understand your motivations, past situations such as that time when you had a conflict with your manager or one of your coworkers, or personality questions such as, are you a team player, which is a classic. The second type of question is scenario-based, and this type of question is usually used by your interviewer to understand how would you handle a specific scenario. For instance, they can ask you, how would you handle a ransomware incident? Or even, let's imagine that we have a service facing the internet which has a critical vulnerability, but we cannot patch it because it would break the service. How would you go about addressing this vulnerability? The third type of question is industry awareness and current events. And with these questions, your interviewer wants to understand if and how are you keeping up with the current trends in cybersecurity. As an example, they can ask you, how do you keep up with the latest news and trends? Or something more complicated such as, what do you think of the new SOC 2 framework requirements? The final category of question is concepts, frameworks, and regulatory bodies. And this question is used to test your understanding of basic security fundamentals and existing frameworks, as well as the organizations or individuals behind them. As an example, they can ask you what is the meaning and goal of the cyber kill chain. They can also ask you what are some defense evasion techniques that are employed by attackers. And in this case, you'd get extra points if you mention the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Now, most of you are probably waiting for this part, the table flipping. What is this about? I remember that when I was interviewing for one of the FANGs, I was introduced to a new way of doing interviews. And I believe at the time they called it table flipping. See, most interview processes are quite linear. They start with a question, you answer the question, then they ask another question, and then you answer another question, and it keeps going like this. Of course, the interviewer may choose to branch into other topics or stick to a set of topics that they want to ask you about. However, the interview is quite bland and simple. The table flipping method, on the other hand, starts with a specific case that you are supposed to develop, and then during the interview, your interviewer is going to force you to switch roles. The beauty of this approach is that it can get as simple or complicated as needed. For example, imagine that you are interviewing for a SOC position. Your interview decides to ask you the question, how would you attack my company? Probably one of your first thoughts is, well, I would craft a malicious email, with a piece of malware, or perhaps I would redirect them to a phishing page or even a page with an exploit, and I would send them to a bunch of people in the company, or perhaps to some people that I knew that would probably have high privileges over the infrastructure. And then you could imagine a scenario like this. So now imagine that you are defending the company. How would you block this phishing email? Following a defense in-depth approach, I would deploy a secure email gateway to block the malicious emails coming in and out of the infrastructure. I would also deploy a secure web gateway on each endpoint belonging to the company. In this way, even if the secure email gateway would fail to block a malicious email, the employees would be protected because they could not click the malicious links inside the emails. I would also provide training on security awareness to the employees, because I believe that proper security is a combination of technical controls and awareness. Well, that's a good answer, but now let's assume that you have all of these in place and you also have tech-savvy employees. How would you as an attacker bypass this blocker? I would use social engineering to target one of their least technical employees to obtain access to their HR portal. I would dump the employee's data, and then I would use this employee's data to impersonate someone from the company and target one of the engineers, for instance. I could send an email to their personal email because I would obtain this email from the HR portal dump. I could also backdoor one of the software packages that is part of their tech stack and infect their entire infrastructure using a supply chain attack. That's a perfect answer. And how would you block a supply chain attack? As you can see, this exercise can go on indefinitely. This exercise is also a two-edged sword. On the one hand, you have a lot of potential routes, but also plenty of ways of finding yourself explaining something that you don't understand. And how do you explain something you don't understand? That is a topic for another video in this series. So you just have to wait. And that is it, Spartans. This is the first episode of this mini-series on acing the interview process. Stay tuned for future videos. Until next time, stay safe, stay paranoid.